In today's video, I'm going to show you how 80% of the serve power comes from the arm action and not the legs. Throughout this video, we're going to dive into the science behind which muscle groups equate to the most amount of power on the serve, and make sure you stick around to the end of the video where I show you the 3 key serve power moves that every top server has used over the past 30 to 40 years. But before we get into the 3 key serve power moves, let's dive into the science and biomechanics behind which muscle groups equate to the most amount of power on your serve. First, we need to understand how power is generated on the serve. And power is generated by maximizing your racket head speed. The more racket head speed you can generate, the more powerful of a serve you can hit. Here's a visual example of me hitting serves starting from nearly 0% power, and then I slowly build it up step by step until I'm maximized at 100%. And what you'll see, the motion remains very similar throughout every serve, but the main difference is my racket head speed. Now, how is racket head speed generated? It's all about maximizing the pre-stretch and stored elastic energy in the appropriate muscle groups, which will then result in an explosive reaction when that stored energy is released. Now, the technical term for this is what's often known as the stretch shortening cycle. And what this basically means, the muscle is stretched, and when it reaches its maximum stretch point, there's then an explosive shortening of that same muscle, and that explosive reaction is then what results in that racket head speed on the serve, in this case. A great analogy for this is using an elastic band. When you pull an elastic band to its maximum stretch point, we have now stored what we refer as elastic energy. Now, what happens when you release? There's an explosive reaction, and that stored energy is then released. The same applies when using the stretch shortening cycle on your serve. So now that we have a good understanding of how this stretch shortening cycle works on your serve, the question we're going to ask is, what muscle groups result in the fastest contraction, which result in the most amount of racket head speed? Now, the studies in biomechanics for the serve have shown that at least 40% of the power comes from the external and internal rotation of your shoulder. Now, how does this external and internal rotation of your shoulder relate to your serve? This rotation of the shoulder essentially relates to the racket drop position on the serve. So when I enter this racket drop, just like so many other great players, I now externally rotate my shoulder. And when I externally rotate the shoulder, I now stretch the muscles in the front part of the shoulder and chest here. And then when this stretch is released and the muscles shorten, there's a very explosive reaction. These muscles here in the front part of the shoulder and chest, they contract very, very fast. And that's 40% of the serve power alone from that movement of the shoulder. Now, another 40% of the power comes from a multitude of different movements all within the upper body. Some is coming from the trunk rotation. Another source of power, big source of power within this movement, is the supination and pronation of the forearm. Again, these muscles contract very fast when you pre-stretch them. And the general idea here is when you add these two together, from the external and internal shoulder rotation and then the other movements, 80% of the power is coming from the upper body and the arm action. So now the question is, where does the other 20% of power comes from? The other 20% comes from your lower body and legs. So although the lower body is very important for a good service action, only 20% of the power comes from the lower body. So this is why, at OTI, we always try to prioritize your hit and arm action first, because 80% of the power you can generate is going to come from this hit and arm action. And then once you have good and sound mechanics, then of course you can add that lower body segment in to fully maximize your potential. So going back to the comparison at the beginning of this video, where I hit a serve on my knees compared to a serve standing up, we now have a better understanding as to why I can still generate so much power from my knees, and that's because at least 80% of the power comes from the optimization of your hidden arm mechanics. So now that we have a good understanding of how power is generated on the serve, I'm now going to show you 3 key serve power moves that every single top server adopts, and those 3 moves are the right to left arm action, the racket drop position, and developing a fluid and continuous arm action. Let's get started on the first power move that is essential for developing a great serve, and that is the right to left arm action. Now, before we get into this right to left arm action, why is it so important for developing power on your serve? It essentially allows your racket to move in the correct flight path to then get you into power position number 2, which is the racket drop position. And as we just discussed in the beginning part of this video, the racket drop equates to a major source of the power on your serve. So the right to left is vitally important to getting into that optimized pre-stretch position. Now, to make this right to left arm action very easy to digest and understand, I'm going to split it into 3 key stages. The first stage is the racket path, or the flight of the racket. The second is the racket alignment throughout the right to left, and the third is the roll of the elbow throughout this motion. Now let's get started with step 1 of the right to left action, which is the flight of your racket. And in order to truly understand this, you need to first get that when we talk about the right to left arm action, we always talk about it in relation to the tennis court. So standing up at the baseline here for a right-handed player, the right side would be the right side fence, the left would be the left side fence. When we say back, this means pointing to the back fence, and when we say front, it's pointing towards the net. So keep that point of reference in mind when we now talk about the flight of the racket. Now, every top server throughout their motion is going to get into, at some point, what we reference of the half serve position. Now, in the half serve position, the tip of the racket is pointing generally to the right side fence. Okay, this is a very important starting point for the right to left. And then from here, what they're going to do, they're going to initiate the right to left, and the racket is going to move from the right side fence to the left side fence. So see, the tip of my racket is now pointing to the left side fence for a right-handed player. The same applies for the left-handed player, is just going in reverse in the other direction. Okay? Now, the issue we find with this, with a lot of players, instead of getting this right to left circular action, players do more of this. They come to the point where the tip of the racket is pointing to the back fence, and someone like Federer did get here where the tip of the racket pointed more back behind him, but then he corrected himself and he brought the racket back around here to get the right to left. But most players, 99% of players from this position where it's pointing to the back fence, they now go like this. The racket goes from back to front. And see now from the side angle, you can see the tip of my racket is pointing towards the net. You can also see this from the back angle. But also looking from the back angle, see how the racket is falling very steeply behind my head. When you come in this steeply behind your head, the racket now can't really get around into that racket drop position. So the flight of your racket, the right to left movement, is a vitally important factor to getting into that racket drop. Moving on to part 2 of the right to left, and that is the racket alignment throughout this movement. Now, what do we mean by the alignment of the racket head? What you're going to see again in this half serve position, right now the palm and the strings are pointing slightly down towards the ground. Now, this is providing, of course, you have a good grip. The general grip for the serve we'd recommend is the continental grip. We're not really going to go into grips here because it'll be too big of a video. But general recommendation is the continental. Now, from the side angle, you can see the angle of my racket face essentially replicates the side of a pitched roof. Have that analogy in mind, okay? You don't want to be like this, where the racket is completely down to the ground, but you also don't want to be the opposite, where it's too open in any way, okay? So it's just like you're forming a side of a pitch roof. Now, from here, what you're going to see, I'm going to initiate the right to left, and as the racket starts to move over my head, see where the palm and strings are pointing. They remain relatively closed. This is a very important factor, and I'll explain to you why in a second. But as the racket goes over my head, the strings are closed and the knuckles of my hand are pointing up to the sky. What we see on the contrary, so many players, I'd say up to 80% of players, including myself when I first started, they do this. As the racket goes over the head, the palm and strings open. And see now they're pointing up to the sky. And this is what's often referred as the waiter's tray position on the serve. Now, why is this so detrimental, and why do you want to do the opposite by keeping the racket face closed? The general idea of this is, as soon as I do this, as soon as I open up the palm and strings throughout the right to left, I now restrict my shoulder movement and I tighten the muscles in the shoulder. And when you have any restrictions or tightening, you lose racket head speed. Okay, and it's also going to impact your ability to get into the other key positions on the serve. Now you can all do this with me right now as you're watching the video. You can put your racket down and just get your arm up at shoulder level, your elbow, and have a 90-degree bend in the arm. Now from here, the first one I want you to do, keeping the palm open, just try to bring the palm down away from you with the palm pointing up to the sky. And you're going to feel the tightness and the restriction in your shoulder when you try to do this. Now, from this position, do this instead. Close the hand over your bicep. So now it's more closed, as you can see there. And now try to bring the hand down. Okay, and you'll feel naturally that the shoulder is a lot more relaxed. So that's why keeping this racket face relatively closed throughout this right to left action, just like this, is vitally important for allowing the shoulder to be relaxed and then allowing you to get into that racket drop position. Now moving on to stage 3 of an effective right to left action, and that is all about the roll of your elbow. Now, the first step, when I'm in the half serve position again, what you're going to see, my elbow is just below shoulder level approximately. Okay, the keys you want to avoid is where the elbow goes too low, dipping into your body as you see here, or the elbow goes too high. Okay, you want it just below shoulder level. The next thing you're going to see, from the back angle, the elbow is aligned with my shoulders, as you can see right here. So the elbow is not too far forward, but I'm also not hyperextending the elbow back behind me. It's nicely aligned with my shoulders, just like this. Okay, now from this point, what I'm going to do, I want you to split the right to left up into 2 components. The right component and the left component. Now, throughout the right component, what's going to happen? I'm now going to begin to bend the elbow to initiate the right to left. So from this point, I bend the elbow and the racket starts to move right to left. But the other thing you're going to see is I'm bending the elbow, but the elbow is not moving. It's remaining stationary in approximately one position. Okay? And now only when I've completed the right component and now the racket begins to pass over my head, now the elbow is going to begin to lead up to contact. And when the elbow begins to lead, that is now the left component bringing me into the racket drop position. Now moving on to the next power move, and that is the racket drop position. And as we already know, the racket drop is one of the main positions on the serve for generating power. And that's because of the pre-stretch and the appropriate muscles just prior to contact. But what are some of the main keys you're going to see with a good racket drop position? For this again, I'm going to split it into 3 stages. Stage 1 is going to be all about the racket alignment. Stage 2 is going to be about your hitting arm structure. And stage 3 is going to be about the momentum of the swing through this position. Now let's get started with the first step of a good racket drop, and that is the positioning and alignment of your racket. Now I've taken my jacket off for this just to give you a better visual representation of what it should look like. I know sometimes with the jacket on it's quite tough to see, even though it is quite chilly here today, so I'm sacrificing my own comfort for the video, so you can all thank me later for that. But when you've completed the right to left and now the racket falls down and away into the racket drop, what are some of the keys you're going to see with the positioning of your racket? The first thing you're going to see for a right-handed player, the racket is aligned along the right side of the body. You want to avoid anything like this where the racket is too far over to your left in this position, because now you're not pre-stretching the muscles. You want the racket aligned over to the right side. The next thing you're going to see the tip of my racket is relatively low. It's going to be somewhere around hip level. You can see this from both the back and also from the side. Now, this of course does depend on your shoulder flexibility. Please always keep that in mind. You never want to force these positions. Go to a position that's comfortable for you. So even if it means you're only able to get here, where the racket is not so low, then so be it. But the general idea is you want good depth in the racket drop, since then you're going to get more pre-stretch in the shoulder muscles. And the last thing you're going to see with the positioning of the racket head, the racket is now effectively closed when I'm in this position. We often see players when they're here again, the racket is too open already, and then when they go up to contact, the racket is already aligned too much open. So those are some of the keys with the positioning of your racket head throughout this action. Moving on to part 2 of a good racket drop, and that is all about your arm structure. Now, the first thing you're going to see is in relation to your elbow. When you get into this racket drop position, the elbow and the shoulders are connected here, and the elbow is leading out in front. The next thing, looking from the back angle, the elbow is above ear level. It's high. Many players, they do this when they get to the racket drop, and the elbow is too low. And again, when you're in this low position with the elbow, there's no pre-stretch of the muscles. You need to get that elbow up and have it high. Now, the next thing you're going to see is the angle of my arm. And what I mean by this is when I get to the racket drop, the hand is either going to be level with my elbow, or some players even get the hand lower than the elbow. Now, again, this does depend on your shoulder flexibility. So don't force any of these positions, but the idea behind this is the lower I can get my hand in relation to the elbow, the more pre-stretch I'm going to get in the muscles. Okay, which is important for maximizing racket head speed. Moving on to step 3 of a good racket drop, and that is the momentum and dynamic stretching in this position. Now, the final thing you have to realize with the racket drop is it's a dynamic position. And what I mean by this is you want to move through this racket drop with momentum. Most players, when they work on the racket drop especially, they manufacture this position too much, and when they get to the racket drop, they stop the motion because they're trying to get here by manufacturing the action. And then when they stop the motion and they pause, they've broken the momentum in the swing. And now they have to recruit muscle in order to reaccelerate the racket, and they lose racket head speed as a result. So you want to feel the momentum of the swing. And one of the best ways to feel this, I get this from OTI Master or Director of Coaching, Greg Lasser. He referenced this term as the power loop. And I really like this concept by Greg. I think it's excellent. And what this means is when you've completed the right component of the right to left, so the racket is beginning to move over the head, what you want to feel is you relax the arm and you feel the weight of the racket head take over and allow that racket to loop down and away with momentum. So see here, it goes down and away, and then it goes through that position. So when I fully relax the swing, the downswing creates the upswing. So you can feel that fluidity and the momentum taking you through that racket drop position. And the more you tap into this feeling, and the more you also allow this power loop and the momentum first, the more power you're going to get on the serve. So that sums it up for the racket drop position, which is power move number 2. Now, one small word of caution when you're working on the racket drop, always work within your own capabilities. Some of you, you may be very flexible in the shoulder, you may have a very healthy shoulder, so you may be able to get into these positions where it's more of a full pre-stretch of the shoulder. Okay, so you may get good depth and good alignment. Some of you, though, may be watching, you may have injuries that you've had in your shoulder in the past, or you may be dealing with injuries right now, or your shoulder just may be very tight and very restricted. So with that, obviously you're not going to get into that full extent of a pro level racket drop, but that's fine. The objective here is it's all about maximizing your own potential. So wherever you get the racket into the racket drop, and that's as far as it can essentially go, so be it, that's fine. It's just work within your own capabilities so you don't end up injuring your shoulder when you work on the racket drop. Moving on to the third and final power move, and that is developing a fluid and continuous arm action. Now, the reason the fluid and continuous arm action is so important for your serve, it allows you to gradually build up the momentum and racket head speed throughout the motion. And the more racket head speed you want to generate, you generally find the more fluid and continuous the arm action has to be. And the analogy I always use for this, imagine that you have two cars in a drag race. You have one car, car A, that accelerates off very quick and then hits the brakes hard. And then after hitting the brakes hard, he accelerates again. And then you have car B that just has constant pressure on the gas and he just slowly builds it up continuously. Which car is going to win? It's going to be the one that has that constant pressure. That's the same with your service mechanics. You want to develop a swing where the arm, when you initiate the arm action doesn't stop. And then you have that fluidity in your swing. And you'll see, just by having fluidity in the motion, you'll see how much effortless power you can generate. I'm not trying to hit the ball hard here. I'm just getting a lot of power because the racket is moving fluidly. And the other key about this is, we said earlier about the racket drop that some of you may be restricted, so you may not be able to get into these full pre-stretch positions. So if you can't, the next best thing is try to develop fluidity in the motion regardless of where you're getting the racket in terms of the depth and the alignment. Still get that fluidity in the swing, so then you can maximize the effortless power and racket head speed on the serve. So that sums it up for today's deep dive into the science behind the power on the serve and also some of the key serve power moves you'll see amongst the best servers in the world. Now, going forward and working on some of these power moves, just make sure that you don't try to work on all three at once, since this is going to overwhelm you and it's going to break down. And you know, all of you are going to be working on different things in your serve. Every serve is going to be different. So some of you may need to work on the right to left. Some of you may need to work on just optimizing the racket drop. So it's going to change player by player. Now, how do you know which one to prioritize for yourself? Film yourself. And you can see on film, okay, which area am I missing out on? And you can also, whilst you're filming yourself and you take a video of your serve, right now you can get a personalized video analysis of your serve by an OTI instructor for just $10. So you can send that video over to us right away. An instructor will review it within a couple of days, and in that analysis you'll have everything you need to know in order to transform your serve and to work on it. So if you're interested, go beneath the video, you'll see the link there. But otherwise, just make sure, go step by step, don't overwhelm yourself. And any questions or all you have on any of this, please go beneath the video and ask us. We're more than happy to answer any questions. And yeah, otherwise, a big thank you for watching today's video and deep dive. And yeah, if you did enjoy it, like, subscribe to the channel, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next video.